I'm Elizabeth at A Literary Princess, and today I have my July wrap-up for you. In July, I read 15 books, which is fantastic. I honestly just feel better when I get to read more because it's my favorite thing to do. So if I'm not getting to do it, I'm like, what am I even doing? So months where I only read like 4 books, it's just sad for me because it means I'm not doing what I love. Whereas in a month when I get to read 15 books, I am clearly doing what I love. So we will jump into those in a minute. I do just want to say again, I am still getting used to this new camera and also a new editing software. So I hope things are okay. Let me know if they're not, and I will try to fix it if I can. I still don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, let's jump into what I read in July. First up, we have a book that I read for my dissertation. This is the Autobiography of Margaret Oliphant. It's from the library, so it does not have a real cover. If you hear banging, my cat is mad at me because I kicked him off the table, and he's trying to open the food cabinet as a result. Unsuccessfully, because we've child locked them, because we know they can get in there. Anyway, I gave the Autobiography of Margaret Oliphant 3.5 stars. It is definitely interesting as somebody who wants to learn about her life because I am looking at the process of her writing almost 100 novels and why they have been left out of the literary canon. However, it's not a linear autobiography in the normal sense. She kind of just wrote it whenever she had the time. So there are gaps of like years between times she got to write. So sometimes she talks about things she's already talked about. She also talks a lot about the death of her children, which understandable, but it's pretty depressing. So I have a lot in here that I can use, but it's not exactly the most enjoyable read in the world just because of how sad her life was. However, definitely useful to me. Next up was another one for my dissertation. This is Under Two Flags by Ouida. Ouida is a Victorian novelist who I am also looking at in my dissertation. Under Two Flags follows a man named Bertie Cecil who is accused of a crime he didn't commit, so he flees to Algeria and joins the French army there because that's what you do apparently. I don't know. While he is there, he ends up in this kind of a love triangle between 2 women. Cigarette, who is a camp follower and a total badass. She's awesome. I love her. One of my new favorite characters. And then a noble woman whose name I don't remember. It's been a while since I read this. Leave me alone. Anyway, I enjoyed this. I gave it 3.5 stars as well. There are definitely some slow parts, especially the war parts. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care. Get to Cigarette, get to the love triangle. I don't care about the war. I am possibly going to be using this in my dissertation. I'm not entirely sure yet. It is one of Ouida's most well-known novels, so I probably will, but I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to use it. Next up is one that I do not have a physical copy of because it was one that was in our vacation house in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I just was like, I'll read this while I'm here. This is the Book of Longing by Leonard Cohen. It is a poetry collection, and some of you might know I'm trying to read more poetry and make myself like poetry more. This has been the most successful collection so far. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I picked it up thinking that I might because I really love Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah, which I'm sure you all know because it's very well known. So I was like, let's give it a go. I enjoyed most of these poems quite a bit. They're very beautiful. I like his style. I like his word choices. Some of them weren't great, but ultimately I really enjoyed this. Next up is the last of my dissertation reads for the month of July. This is Blush, Faces of Shame by Elspeth Probyn. I'm reading this because I am using affect theory in my dissertation, specifically to discuss how these women who write all these novels end up getting shamed for the amount that they have written. And there's fascinating stuff in Margaret Oliphant's autobiography that brings that up. But anyway, I read this book as part of my research into affect theory and the idea of shame. I gave this 3 stars. Some parts were great, some parts I didn't really like. It's an academic read. What are you gonna do? Next up was one that I read on ebook but have a physical copy of now. I had an ARC. This is Thief, Liar, Lady by D.L. Soria. It is a retelling of Cinderella with a Cinderella character who is scheming and plotting, and I loved it. I had so much fun with this. I mean, so much so that I asked my mom for a copy for my birthday because I was like, I need a physical copy. I gave this 5 stars. Highly recommend it. So much fun. I will hopefully have a review coming out on my blog at some point because, you know, the book came out at the beginning of July and it's August now, like mid-August. Don't look at me. It's fine. Anyway, highly recommend. Excellent retelling. So much fun. Next up, we have another poetry collection, and this was the least successful book of the month. This is Snapshots of a Daughter-in-Law by Adrienne Rich. It is a poetry collection. I have really loved Rich's prose. I've read 2 collections of her prose for my feminist theory list for my qualifying exams. So I was like, let's give her poetry a try. Unfortunately, I really didn't like these at all. I can't even think of one that I actually enjoyed in here. I ultimately gave this 2 stars. I think there's some merit to them, but I just felt they felt too stiff. I didn't like the way that her language worked, and it wasn't for me. I was very disappointed. Next up is Cujo by Stephen King. I wanted to read this because A, I love Stephen King, but B, because AJ Dunn over at AJ Dunn Reads and Writes made this sound so amazing, and they were, in fact, correct. I gave this 5 stars. I specifically saved Cujo for July because it takes place in the summer in the middle of a heat wave. And AJ said the best time to read this is the summer in the middle of a heat wave, preferably in a roasting hot car, because that's part of this book. I did not read it in a roasting hot car. I read it in my air-conditioned apartment, but it was the perfect time to read this. This is fantastic. It is sad. I cried. I knew I would cry. I cry anytime there is an animal that dies, and that's not even a spoiler. Like, I think we all know Cujo dies. He is a dog that contracts rabies and goes on a rampage and kills, I believe, kills 3 people and is kind of responsible for the death of another person. This is really a character study. We have all these different characters, and for the most part, they are not great people. Most of them suck, and a lot of them are the real villains of the story because Cujo can't help it. Cujo wants to be a good dog, but all of a sudden he's sick and he doesn't feel well, and he doesn't know what's causing him to not feel well, and he thinks it's the people, and Stephen King just does such a good job with his characters, including the dog. I feel like this is exactly how the mind of a dog is. I mean, obviously I can't say for sure, but as somebody who has owned dogs my whole life, this felt very accurate to how a dog's mind works. It is also a book where the supernatural plays less of a part, and I won't say it plays no part. There is a possible supernatural thing going on, however, it is very small compared to just the reality and the everyday horrors of humanity. And I think that's the scariest part of any Stephen King book, and it comes out so well here. Next up, we have my Fairy Tale Friday read for the month, which was actually another Cinderella retelling. This is The Shadow in the Glass by J.J.A. Harwood. This is a historical fiction Gothic retelling of Cinderella, following a young woman named Eleanor who has been forced to be a maid in the house where she was previously treated like a daughter. She ends up making a deal with a demon for some wishes, and you can imagine how that turns out. I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. I have a whole video talking about it as a retelling and giving my full thoughts, so you can definitely go watch that, although it does contain spoilers. Next up, we have my first read for Jane Austen July. Jane Austen July is a month-long event hosted by Katie from Books and Things, Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia from Spinster's Library. The idea is to read Jane Austen in the month of July. I got to read 2 books for this. I have wanted to read more, but it just didn't happen. This first one is one of Jane Austen's novels, Mansfield Park. I read Mansfield Park only once before when I was, I think, in college, and it was the last of Jane Austen's novels I had to read, and it was ultimately my least favorite. I still gave it 5 stars when I first read it. I think just because I was like, well, it's Jane Austen. But I found it very hard to get through. I thought it dragged. I didn't really like the main character, Fanny. So I decided it's time to reread this from a more grown-up perspective as somebody who has studied English literature extensively. Let's go. And I loved it so much. It's not my favorite Jane Austen novel. I'm not sure if it would be my least favorite still. I need to reread a few more, I think, to really decide the ranking. But I loved this so much this time. I loved Fanny. I thought she was boring when I was younger. She's not boring at all. I thought she was weak and like a pushover. No, she is not. She does get pushed around sometimes, and that is largely due to the way she has been raised and what her social position is. But when it really matters, she does stand up for what she believes in and what she thinks is right. This is also the most scandalous of Jane Austen's novels. There is actual adultery in this book. Like, it's the most scandalous of any of her novels. So I honestly just loved this so much. I still do not like Edmund Bertram as Fanny's ultimate husband. I don't like him. I think he is just as useless as the rest of the people in this book. I don't want her marrying Henry Crawford either, because he also sucks. Like, Fanny should be a independent woman, but obviously that's not gonna happen. But so I do have my problems with it, but I loved it so much this time. I could really appreciate Jane Austen's writing. Parts that I thought were boring the first time I read it were really great this time around. I'm so happy that I got a chance to reread it and fall in love with it. Next up is actually a new favorite of mine, and if I had filmed this literally 2 days ago, I would have said that it was my top book of the year, but something else has come along. So right now this is in second place for the best books of the year. This is the Travelling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. This follows a cat named Nana who was rescued by a man whose name I don't remember, Satoru. And they've been living together for a while, and happily everything's going great. And all of a sudden, Satoru is trying to find a new home for Nana. And we follow the journey of these two meeting prospective new homes for Nana and kind of finding out what is happening here. Why does Nana need a new home? This book. I sobbed throughout the last maybe probably like the last 50 pages of this book was just me sobbing my eyes out. Okay. I will be nice. I will give you one little spoiler. If you don't want a spoiler, then I'm going to raise my hand up and then just skip to where my hand's no longer up. The cat does not die. If you are sensitive to animals dying, it is not the cat that dies in this book that makes it sad. That doesn't happen. Anyway, I was a mess throughout this book, but it was just such a beautiful and touching story. I am going to be recommending this to everybody. Everybody. It's so quiet and just gorgeous. And again, I feel like Arikawa really gets into the mind of an animal. I could totally see my cats talking like this. Absolutely. Highly recommend this if you've never read it. Just go in knowing you're gonna cry, and that's it. That's it you need to know. It's so good. Next up was my second and last read for Jane Austen July, and this was a memoir of Jane Austen and other family recollections. So a memoir of Jane Austen is by Austen's nephew, James Edward Austen Lee. And there are several other shorter pieces in here let me get to the table of contents, by Austen's other relatives. So we have 2 biographical notices for her by Henry Austen, who was her brother. Then we have Recollections of Aunt Jane by Anna Lefroy, who was her niece. And My Aunt Jane Austen, a memoir by Caroline Austen, another one of her nieces. This whole collection was edited by Catherine Sutherland. I gave this 4 stars. I thought this was really fascinating. It's so interesting to see Jane Austen through the eyes of her relatives, especially relatives who were young at the time and who remember her as Aunt Jane, and just that she told them stories and she was their favorite aunt. It's so sweet. Catherine Sutherland's introduction and explanatory notes are excellent and provide so much needed context for this. I highly recommend this if you're interested in Jane Austen's life. I am planning to read a more modern biography of Jane Austen because obviously there is so much of her life that gets left out of here because James Edward Austen Lee was writing in the Victorian era. He was trying to portray a very specific version of his aunt, and so I obviously now want the full story. But yes, I gave this 4 stars. I had a very good time with it. Next up was just a fun read. This is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. My mother-in-law gave this to me for Christmas a few years ago, and I hadn't gotten around to it yet, and I was like, you know what? It's a mystery thriller. That's perfect for July, and it was. I had a great time with this. It follows several characters at a wedding, and one of them is a murderer, but we don't know who is dead, and we don't know who the murderer is. So we flash back between the night of the wedding when there is a dead person, and then we go back to the day before to find out all the context. This was just so much fun. It kept me guessing. The characters were all kind of deliciously awful, and the setting was great. It takes place on this very remote Irish island. It takes place in a rainstorm. Like, it's just A+. I gave this 4 stars. I had so much fun. Last 3 go together. These are all rereads. This is one of my favorite series, not because it's good, but because I find it comforting. This is the All for the Game series by Nora Sakavic, which contains The Foxhole Court, The Raven King, and The King's Men. This is about Neil Jostin, who is the son of a mob boss who is on the run from his dad, but he ends up signing to play with the team, the Foxes from Palmetto State University, and the sport he is playing is a completely made-up sport called Exy that's kind of a cross between lacrosse and hockey. Look, yes, it sounds wild. It is wild. Is it good? No. Like, no. Logically speaking, is this a good series? No, probably not. Do I have fun with it every time? Yes, I do. And I don't know, I needed a comfort read for the end of the month, and I was like, you know what, it's time to reread this. So I gave all 3 of these 5 stars. Again, are they technically 5-star books? No, but are they 5 stars in my enjoyment of them? Yes, and that is what matters to me. So, those are the 15 books that I read in July. Let me know down in the comments below, have you read any of these? What did you think? What did you read for Jane Austen July, if you participated? And what other books did you read in July? It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.